So there are some really big problems in the world. Climate change, oil spills, pollution, corporations owning seed patents and farmland, and workers in India committing suicide due to GMO regulations. But the problems are all made worse and worse when well-meaning people get mad at all the wrong things and end up polarizing the issue and muting the real issues. First example is, of course, GMOs. GMO has more variety possible than all the species that have and ever will exist. The combinations are endless. The number of people on the left especially who have a blanketed hatred of GMOs are both sad and embarrassing, and their fear of frankenfood muddles the real conversation needed around things like patenting and regulation. GMOs are wonderful or evil depending on how we deal with them and use them. Golden rice has saved the eyesight of thousands of children who would otherwise have had vitamin A deficiencies in poor areas, and a new override pathway in how most plant inefficiencies breathe, which ends up poisoning themselves and then they have to filter it out, will increase plant efficiency by 40%, meaning we will need to use 40% less land to grow the same amount of food in 10 to 20 years, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has open sourced all the data on how to alter plants this way. However, the way people discuss it on the left are often that all GMOs are bad, even when pretty much all of scientists agree that GMOs are safe and good. We just need more done to ensure science, regulation, and patent laws are discussed. Next, fracking. The evil scourge of the left. I get it. Fire out of the taps are scary. Earthquakes and poisoned drinking water is awful. But why are these problems? It all comes down to lack of regulation. Fracking companies are often regulated state by state. In so many states, oversight is pretty much just a rubber stamp and a joke. If you drain your wastewater into a single underwater retention pond, you're going to get earthquakes. Forcing companies to split up the wastewater over a wider area is expensive, so regulators don't bother with it, because there is so much political pressure from fracking companies. Their fracking recipes are also a company secret, with a company always favored in court, so when scientists find poison aquifers, they aren't allowed to compare the results with fracking chemicals because they're closed to them, making it really hard to sue the frackers in federal court, even though the fracking recipe was paid for by taxpayers through research grants. Fracking companies often don't cap all of their old oil holes from the past when people mine the naturally occurring natural gas and then abandon it, because that requires costly surveying, and that ends up causing methane to gush out into the atmosphere, making it create just as much greenhouse gas as coal and oil. We still don't know exactly what causes the polluted water tables, but most likely it's caused by this as well. Fracking companies also use bullying tactics to force people into bad deals to let them frack under their land, which, if you're in a poorly regulated state, is kind of a gamble. And they will pay pennies on the dollar for water to frack that should go to residents. However, what if I told you that well-regulated fracking is a wonderful thing? When burned, it creates none of the pollution coal does and kills a microscopic fraction less people than coal and oil. If regulated, it should produce a microscopic fraction of greenhouse gases and be the perfect transition fuel to get us off of both. Fracking also produces oil at the same time, and America is now an oil exporter and energy independent just because of fracking. Sadly, instead of making fracking the super fuel it should be, we instead just vilified it completely. Instead of demanding to get all the benefits of fracking with none of the side effects through regulation, it's now a partisan issue, and few are talking about the real issues. You're either for or against fracking, and there's no middle ground, even though it is truly the perfect transition fuel and has lowered pollution and deaths from burning coal already. Nuclear is another that people on the left absolutely abhor and want banned, and for good reason, with the disasters of Chernobyl, Fukushima, and 3 Mile Island. A mix of bad design and big powerful companies skirting regulation. However, the uranium water reactors were initially invented just for Navy carriers and subs, and its designer was appalled that it was going to be used for civilian purposes. They were just going to scale up reactor design, and he didn't see that as stable, which Chernobyl proved this to be true. Then mechanical problems and computer issues caused the 3 Mile Island accident where it vented radioactive steam. Since 1979, we have brutally trained operators and have created second-generation reactor designs that ensure that none of the problems caused by those two incidents ever can happen again. Then Fukushima happened, by corrupt companies building in disaster-prone areas, caused the anti-nuclear sentiment to pick back up. This caused nuclear plants to be shuttered all over the world, adding to our carbon footprint. First and second wave reactors are very problematic. They don't make more money than they produce, so they always have to be subsidized by governments to keep them going. Either government oversight is ridiculous and expensively massive, or you will have something go wrong. These reactors still produce lots of radioactive waste that will sit in mountains for thousands of years. Nuclear as we have it is a Russian roulette, except in naval use. However, because of this anti-nuclear movement, governments have shut down advancing other forms of nuclear energy out of fear, and it's boosted our carbon footprint. Third and fourth generation reactors are in plans as theory only because the government doesn't want to spend the massive amount of money needed to make them, especially since the reason we spent so much on the current models was because it produced plutonium and other models do not. While the Navy was perfecting uranium water reactors, the Air Force discovered the molten salt fast breeder reactors, which went nowhere because A, they don't produce plutonium, and B, we don't have the materials at the time to deal with the caustic salt. It was impossible to melt down as its fuel was liquid, not solid. It couldn't explode or leak, and when it shut down, it just shut down. It also produced way less waste, and we can use radioactive waste we currently have sitting around to fuel it. The inventor of the uranium water reactor said this was a path for large scale, but the government really wanted that sweet, sweet plutonium. Because of all our anti-nuclear partisanship, new funding has been starved from these projects. However, China has decided to go full bore with this process and is hoping to start selling them around the world in about 10 years, especially now that we have such new modern materials that corrosion issue is not so much a problem. Instead, China will get this money, not the US. Also, we desperately need medical reactors to produce medical isotopes. There's currently only one in the world in Israel. And lastly, oil pipelines. Yes, oil leaks are sadly common, and we need to end the use of oil. But we're still using oil. And compared to shipping via trains and trucks, pipelines are way more environmentally friendly and pollute much less when well regulated. The problem with the Keystone XL was using a highly corrosive tar sands built by a company with a bad track record of pipe leaks by skirting regulation. Much like fracking, pipelines should be the more environmental choice as a transition to cleaner energy. You are all having the wrong argument and outrage. Why aren't they regulating this potentially much safer and environmentally friendly way of transporting fuels, taking this dangerous stuff off the roads and rails, which create what are dubbed bomb trains because sometimes they'll actually blow up, instead of being mad about them taking land? It's probably because the roads and rails have already been taken, and there's more negative emotion when it comes to loss than positive emotion when it comes to things overall getting better because of change. When you take a strong position against something and don't know all the facts, you can end up hurting your own cause by making it partisan instead of bipartisan. How much to regulate or providing funding research to make them safer and not banning them should be the argument. But it's a lot more complex than just vilifying and banning a technology because it's a Pandora's box we couldn't possibly control. If well-funded and well-regulated, we could be carbon-free, use way less fertilizers and land, had the perfect transition fuel, or save so much power and pollution through well-regulated pipelines. But the enemy of the good is often the perfect. Another issue is NIMBY, or not in my backyard, where often way worse issues are happening in poor areas, and to reduce the problem overall, we build other things in areas with a middle class, and the middle class don't like having to face the same fears and threats as poor people, and have much more political power to prevent GMOs or fracking near them. Until we can get to perfect, we need to do what we can to understand the complexities to make the bad that we have even better, even if it feels like we're just making it worse, even when overall it's making things better. But that would require us to overcome our NIMBY fear.